Hi, everyone. Uh, Now I want to talk to you about something that began to emerge at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. That's the emergence of Pentecostalism and its significance upon our understanding of renewal history. Um, there are a variety of different factors and incidents that helped shape and influence the emergence of Pentecostalism. Certainly, the Holiness movement and the Keswick movement, both with their influence upon the baptism in the Holy Spirit, helped shape and influence the Pentecostal movement. Edward Irving, I think, already mentioned in his church was the first recorded incident of speaking in tongues in the 19th century, at least among the first. And he also helped bring about a strong influence upon spirit baptism and the spiritual gifts. I think we've also briefly mentioned the camp meetings at Cane Ridge, Kentucky, and also the holiness camp meetings that later emerged after that, that gained a lot of popularity, and there was frequent and numerous expressions of charismatic gifts in all of those camp meetings. I don't know if we've mentioned Johann Blumhardt, but he's featured in that book on German Pietism. His development of a ministry of healing and healing homes was influential in helping to help prepare the 20th century for the emergence of Pentecostalism. North American Shakers who spoke in tongues. We already mentioned early Mormons like Joseph Smith and Brigham Young that spoke in tongues. I think we've also mentioned the Russian Molokon revival of 1833. We haven't mentioned the 1896 revival that occurred in Christian Union in North Carolina. This helped found one of the earliest Pentecostal churches of the 20th century. They date their foundation to this revival in 1896. That's the Church of God, Cleveland, Tennessee. But let's look at some of the early progenitors and founders of Pentecostalism. One of those is Alexander Dowie. In 1894, he helped establish Zion Tabernacle. But when his church faced controversy and declined after his death in 1907, a new preacher from Chicago, William Durham, had just received spirit baptism at Azusa Street, and many of Dowie's followers joined him. But the largest legacy, interestingly enough, of Dowie's influence is actually in South Africa, where the largest Christian denomination in South Africa is the Zion Christian Pentecostal churches. There's actually several of them, but there's one that's the largest that has, I think, 4 or 5 million members at least. But they trace their origin to his Zion Tabernacle in Illinois. But the interesting thing is, when we talk about progenitors and founders of Pentecostalism, often we have skeletons in our closet. Any movement in church history has its characters that often sometimes we want to forget about. And I remember in a recent lecture, a friend of mine, making a wonderful presentation about Alexander Dowie as really a Pentecostal pioneer, and there was a rebuttal by somebody else that considered him a very distant cousin. And the reason he did is simply because Alexander Dowie promoted some very controversial ideas. Among those, and this is what led to some of the controversy, there was financial scandal. He also had a connection with Mormonism. He didn't become a Mormon, but he interacted with Mormons because he wanted to create his own polygamous Christian community in Mexico, which obviously was very controversial and scandalous, and actually led to the downfall of his own church shortly before his death. But it's important to remember that often there are skeletons in all of our closets. But certainly, there's also inspiring figures like A.B. Simpson. He was the founder of the Christian and Missionary Alliance churches. I recently visited a very large CMA church near my home in Portland, Oregon, actually up in Tacoma, Washington area. And I was speaking with their missions pastor, and we were talking about early Pentecostal theology. A.B. Simpson emphasized healing and evangelism. He promoted early spirit baptism, among other things, spiritual gifts. But the one thing that he rejected was the idea that tongues was the only initial evidence of spirit baptism. And this friend of mine and I were talking, and we both incidentally speak in tongues. But it was just that one particular theological issue that A.B. Simpson disagreed with. But he still nevertheless very, very much influenced early Pentecostal ideas and theology, both in the Assemblies of God and in the Foursquare Church. In fact, in the Assemblies of God, a significant portion of the earliest leaders came out of the CMA churches, or they were trained at Nyack College, which was an early CMA Bible college. Somebody else that was influential in early Pentecostalism was Carrie Judd Montgomery. She developed a very significant healing ministry that began in 1879 with her own miraculous healing. She also spoke regularly to African American audiences and received sharp criticism for it, but she refused to stop. She was a personal friend of A.B. Simpson, helping start the CMA churches. But after visiting Azusa Street, she quickly joined the Pentecostal movement and became a charter member of the Assemblies of God. Another woman involved in the early Pentecostal movement was Marie Woodworth Etter, who became a Christian in the prayer revival of 1857. She had participated in evangelistic ministry in the Disciples of Christ, but was prohibited from preaching because she was a woman. So she joined a Quaker church and there was introduced to spirit baptism. She became involved in healing ministry and had a very large evangelistic tent ministry, and also became a founding member of the Assemblies of God. Somebody else influential, wait, what a minute. Why are we including a photo of Keeping Up with the Kardashians in the emergence of Pentecostalism? Well, it's funny you might ask. It's interesting. If you actually go to the Wikipedia page on Robert Kardashian, the patriarch of the Kardashian family, who he and Kris Jenner divorced, but he is the biological father of all 5 daughters. Well, if you go to his Wikipedia page, you'll find an interesting little mention of the fact that these 5 girls, their great-great-grandfather was a very influential Pentecostal Christian in a place called Karakala, Armenia. And because of a prophetic warning that their family and hundreds of other families needed to leave Karakala to avoid perishing. And fortunately, or unfortunately, if you're tired of watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, those families left Karakala and came to the United States and escaped the Armenian genocide that occurred just a few years later. Well, it's interesting to note that one of their cousins was somebody named Dima Shakarian, who actually helped start the modern charismatic renewal of the 20th century. We'll share more about that later, but anyway, there is a Pentecostal connection with the Kardashians. Let's go to the final 2 significant people involved in the emergence of Pentecostalism, and I'm running out of time, so we're going to have to make this a 2-part lecture as well.